I found this book, Wetlands, Plants and Animals, and it's a coloring book, but I haven't colored it yet. And I came across a really interesting thing on seahorses, and they're actually not horses. They're a kind of fish. They're a pipe fish. That's a fish that kind of sort of looks like a pipe, has very hard scales on the outside, almost like armor. And I started reading about them, and I learned a lot of facts. So I kind of had fun. I made a list of facts that is just so interesting to kind of read through. And while we're drawing the seahorses, I might bring some of them up. I also did a little practice seahorse drawing. What we'll do is probably draw the seahorse first in pencil, just so we can get a feel for it. And then I think I'm going to do it in oil pastel, but you could do it in color crayon or watercolor, depending upon what you have. I'm Miss Treese. Welcome to Art with Miss Treese, and we're going to get started. I have my reference material. Here's a quick little sketch I did when I was making my little fun list about all sorts of facts about seahorses. And I took that sketch from my resource material. You know, it's absolutely fine to look things up on a computer or on your phone, but I really prefer to get a book that's printed, because I think really it's a little bit easier to look at these. It's not on a screen, and hey, if the power goes out, you can still see it. So let's start drawing a seahorse. Oh, I'm going to give you a couple little interesting facts about it. There are 46 different kinds of seahorses in the world. Now this is going to be our sketch, so your paper can go any way you want. It can go vertically, it can go horizontally, but I think I'm going to just do vertically. You can do a border around it, but this is just going to be a little practice sketch. So if you start out with your seahorse, look at this shape. It's almost like an S. So there we go with the alphabet again. So I'm going to do almost like an S here, like that. Look at that. That's pretty fun. And then when you look at their cute little heads, their eyes are actually about halfway down that whole length of their face. In a real horse, those eyes, in a horse that's on the ground or land animal, those eyes are up about a third. It's just really fun to kind of start learning proportions of things. So there is a little dip right there, and then you kind of dip down again. I don't know if you remember the dragon we did, but there's a little semblance of that dragon. So there's a little dip and kind of a point where their eyes are going to be. And then here's their mouth. They don't have any teeth. I learned that when I was looking them up. There's a cheek that's just like on kind of a regular horse. I'm going to do the eyeball, just kind of a round circle there, and the pupil, a little bit dark there. And again, we're looking at the side. And then there's the front part of the seahorse, and that little tail, it's pretty interesting. That little tail curls around things and kind of anchors them to things. These are some fins that kind of come right out of their cheek. They're not very good swimmers. I learned that. They're really not very good swimmers. These little fins that come out of their cheeks help steer them. And then this larger fin back here is kind of on a little bump here. And it's sort of fin shaped with some scallops like this, with kind of a scalloped edge. And the lines that, at least in the seahorse I was looking at, the lines that make up the fin are a little bit different than the lines that make up the fin up there. And this is kind of like the propeller. This is sort of the engine. This propels or pushes the seahorse forward, and these steer it. Then they have, kind of starting here, they've got their bodies kind of divided into sort of sections like that. And this one kind of comes down like here, like this. And these are where their scales are, and their scales are kind of very hard and almost like armor. And then they have these fun little sort of spines. And I have a feeling that's for protection if something comes along and wants to eat them. If you take a mouthful of those sharp little spines, it might not be very pleasant. Those spines are kind of random, but they kind of do sort of stick out, get smaller as they kind of come down the body of the seahorse. And then you can do like little sections like this that kind of indicate the scales. They get smaller, the sections get smaller as you get towards the end of the tail. like this. So we're just going to finish these out like this. You don't have to do that. You could do some fancy scales. I'm trying to do this one as realistic as I can because for me that's kind of fun. And again, I'm just sketching this in so I kind of have an idea. And this is what's really, really interesting. Seahorses, when they lay their eggs, the man seahorse actually carries the eggs around in a pouch, like a kangaroo. And when the eggs are hatching, they hatch out of his like little pocket here, out of his pouch like a kangaroo. Sometimes they call seahorses kangaroo fish. And they can have up to 2,000 seahorses at a time. I thought that was like really, really pretty amazing. So you can kind of sketch like this, sort of get an idea. The end of the tail, this is kind of fun. The end of the tail, I'm going to do a piece of seaweed here. The end of the tail sometimes can attach to a piece of seaweed, and that kind of anchors them. When seahorses get into storms, they have a hard time because they have a hard time steering. And lots of times, baby seahorses will sort of attach themselves to grown-up seahorses, and that's how they learn what to eat and so on. It's pretty interesting. So that's just our beginning sketch. I picked the colors of oil pastels that I needed so I don't have to root around in that great big box I have. But I did put my oil pastels in a container that I can easily reach. And like I've said before, these little babies are round and they can roll right off your table onto the floor, and they can get stepped on, and then the situation is probably not the happiest. So I'm going to keep it in my container there. I'm going to do oil pastel for this project that we're doing. I'm going to pull my white around here. I'm going to do my border or frame. And again, that's optional for you. I just sort of like doing it because it kind of helps my brain sort of get ready to draw. Kind of gives me an idea of the space I'm going to have to work in. And again, I'm always turning my paper. I know some of you guys might like to keep your paper in one spot, but it helps me to turn it. You just have to find your own way of doing things. So I'm going to have mine go vertically just because the seahorse is kind of has a vertical shape. And what's kind of fun, when you sort of think about it, you don't have to do one big seahorse. You could do a whole bunch of like little seahorses if you wanted. And again, there's 46 kinds of seahorses, and I found some that were some really gorgeous colors, and one of them was oranges and kind of pinks and yellows, and I think that's the color that I'm going to do here. So I have my practice paper that I did. I'm going to kind of keep that there so I can sort of look at that while I'm doing this. And again, we did sort of an S. It's kind of fun how nature, I think we've talked about this before, you can find the alphabet in nature. I'm just going to kind of go over it. Again, I'm using white. That's a little preference of mine. So there's the top of the seahorse's head. There's that little dip there, a little point where we're going to put our eye. And then there's the little snout with the mouth. The mouth is kind of slanted a little bit. And then there's the part that almost looks like a cheek on a horse. You know, there are so many things in nature that's so much fun to look at. There's the front of the seahorse, and I'm going to bring this around here. And it gets smaller and smaller towards the end. That's going to be we're just going to outline our steering fin here. Remember, we kind of learned that these fins steer, okay? And then there's a little bump on the back in this particular kind of seahorse, and that's where there's a little bit bigger fin, and that's like the motor fin. That fin makes that animal go. You know, I don't know if it would be a school of seahorses, because technically they're a fish, or if it would be a herd because you're calling them horses. Now we're going to do those kind of fun little spines that the seahorses have. That if somebody wanted to eat them, it might be a little bit unpleasant and they might get stuck, so they might spit that little seahorse out. And it almost looks like a mane too. I think that's the other thing. And there is that. We're going to do the eye. Remember, the eye is more in the middle of the head of the seahorse. And then we have the sections. That's the front part. And then there's another section that kind of comes down like this. And again, the scales, it's kind of interesting. These scales make it a little bit simpler than in real life, but that's okay because it's a drawing. But you can kind of think about it. The scales are a little bit kind of like armor. And I've got some other facts here. Let's see. They live from 1 to 4 years. And they can be anywhere from ½ an inch long to up to 14 inches long. Up to some seahorses are bigger, a little bit bigger than a whole foot, which is really kind of cool. They eat plankton and tiny shrimp, and they eat all the time because they use up so much energy. So there's the basic of my seahorse. I'm going to put a little bit of seaweed here. They live in the ocean and they can live in saltwater marshes. They live in sort of tropical. I'm going to have this one sort of hooked around a little bit of seaweed here. They live in tropical climates or temperate. In other words, you're not going to find them in Puget Sound like where we live or cold weather. And, oh, the scientific name, this is so much fun. The scientific name for seahorse is hippocampus. And hippo is the horse part, and campus means monster. So when you look at the word hippocampus, it looks like sea monster. I think that's Latin, which I'm not very familiar with, but hey, there's always something new to learn. I'm going to add a little bit more seaweed here. So there's the basic part of my seahorse, and now I'm going to start coloring them in. Because I'm going to be using orange on this darker surface, I'm just going to very lightly color in, I'm going to add white underneath all of it. Now if yours is a different color, you don't have to do that at all, but I'm just going to sort of fill in white here. All right, so I've laid my white in because the colors I'm going to be using orange and maybe a little bit of pink. I think I'm going to start out with kind of two kinds of oranges, a light orange and a dark orange. And I'll just start sort of coloring this in. I'm going to start out with a real light orange, which almost looks yellow. All right, and you don't need to. You can make your seahorse purple, it could be blue. As long as you get the basic shape down and kind of do the technique. If you don't have oil pastels, we've done a number of coloring lessons. If you haven't seen those, you could go back and you could do this same thing on white paper probably, with color crayons. And you can kind of blend the color crayons by putting them on top of each other. But we haven't done oil pastels in a while, and it's one of my favorite things, so I thought, let's do oil pastels. You could also do watercolor. You could outline it in pencil and also do watercolor. I'm going to come in with a darker orange. So I'm just going to kind of keep layering. We're going to probably do a little speed up here so you can watch it, but you can always kind of slow down. Like this. And now here's the fun part. I'm going to start blending. I'm just layering in like this. Notice how some of the white that I put in initially kind of defines the scales. And you can kind of just sort of using your own judgment, figure out where you want to put your colors. If you want to have like a little darker contrast at certain points, that makes it interesting, like this. But again, just get the basic shape down and have some fun. I mean, you can copy what I'm doing, but if you have a better idea, you might end up with an actually way better drawing. As you guys know, oil pastel is not as precise as colored crayons, and it's not as precise as drawing with a pencil or, say, watercolors, but the effect you get is just so, I think, really, really, really nice. Now I'm going to add a little contrast here. I'm trying to keep my oil pastels in my little box here so that they don't get on the floor. I'm going to use black for the pupil, but you don't have to use black. You could use any color that you wanted. It could be a lighter one. And then I'm going to go around that eye with a little bit of a darker, see how that kind of can sort of bring that out. And then, how about this? I've got a little bit of red here. Might just bring that there. All of this does is just to sort of give your little seahorse a shape. I can come back in with some black like this and blend that so we get a little bit of shading like this. So we can define those areas a little bit better. Maybe I'll put it around that upper steering fin, and then that's the motor fin. But just adding a little bit of black to this and blending it in, it's going to give me just a little bit of depth to this. Like that. There we go. Oh, and there's that little tail. I'm going to have that tail sort of curled around a little piece of seaweed. It's kind of curled back there. I just thought it's so interesting that baby seahorses get to hitch rides on grown-up seahorses. I come in with a little bit lighter here, like that. And then, now that I'm almost done with this part, I'm going to just give a little bit more here. Go ahead and color in my seaweed, and I'm using my seaweed almost like decoration in the back of as a background for my drawing. And I've got that going over the tail there because the tail's curled around it. Using kind of a moss green for the seaweed. If you have that in your colors, you could use dark green. You could mix the greens. I'm probably going to end up mixing this green too. And I've got these seaweeds are just sort of kind of flowing a little bit like that. Now let's see, might add a little bit more to this. And as you can see, I did have to peel one of my oil pastels. I'm going to save that, throw that out when I'm done, when I'm cleaning up. I'm going to do, and again, I love to use white for outlining. I'm going to add more seaweed. Seaweed comes in all sorts of different forms too. Might do a little bit of maybe more of a fern kind of seaweed there. and come back in. Using a different color of green here for a different kind of seaweed. And again, I'm probably going a little bit quicker than I should with this, but what happens when I go over the white? Kind of brightens that up. Going over the white with a little bit of a lighter one. You know, sometimes it's kind of fun just to reach into your supply of oil pastels and kind of grab whatever gets your interest and incorporate that into your drawing. It's important that you make your drawing you, and because you're kind of unique and you're going to develop a unique style. I'm not very orderly when I work. I sort of like to just go ahead and sometimes sort of see what happens. Maybe what I might do too with this, I've got a little bit of pink. I could add more to the background here, but I think I'm just going to kind of come in and add a few little pink highlights here just to kind of and blend it. Again, you don't have to blend your oil pastel. I love blending, but that's up to you. So there's kind of a little bit of a basic seahorse or pipefish. And I hope you learned a few little facts. I hope you spend some time looking more of those things up. Oops, I don't want to forget putting my name on. I grabbed a pencil just for something different, and I'm not going to put it over any of the oil pastel, but I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to put my initials and the year. It's not very big and you can't see it very well, but it's there. Well, here's our seahorse or pipefish, and we did a practice on white paper just to kind of get ourselves familiar with it. And prior to that, I did a little bit of research, wrote down some facts, which are kind of cool. And I did another sketch here too. The more you draw something, the better it's going to turn out. This one is my finished colored one out of oil pastel, but you could use color crayon, you could use watercolor, or you could just do it in pencil, or even colored pencil. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.